So in this video, we're going to do something very similar to the thing that we did in the last video. The difference is that I want to put together a simple web server. One of the reasons why I want to do this here is there's a particular ES6 feature I want to kind of demo for you guys early on, because although in the later videos in this series we're going to talk about ES6 features, there's one that I really want to talk about as early as possible because it's going to clean up our code substantially. And it'll also give us an opportunity to talk a little bit about streams and URL parsing and all of that fun stuff. So again, you might not be necessarily interested in writing Node applications like what we're going to do in this video, but again, it's very, very good practice because when we get to writing our build scripts, no matter what platform you're on, we're still going to be using the same environment. So it's very important to get familiar with that environment. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to reuse this exact same project because we're only going to be writing another single file here. And so I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call it server.js. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to move that over so we get a little bit more room here. The first thing I'm going to do is import all of our stuff. Now, we're not going to need all of these packages right away, but I want to import them all preemptively so that I don't have to jump around the file too much. So I'm going to start off with var http equals require HTTP. Now again, these are all built-in modules, and you can read on the documentation about them and to learn more about what they can do. We'll do query string equals require query string, and we'll also pull in fs equals require fs. We're also going to pull in path equals require path, and URL equals require URL. So HTTP is responsible, not surprisingly, for creating a high throughput HTTP server. Query string, not surprisingly, is for parsing query strings. So if you're not familiar with the query string, for example, it would be localhost 300, and then the question mark would be like 1 equals 3. That doesn't really make any sense. 2 equals 10. So this part right here would be the query string, and we kind of want to grab a package that'll parse that for us, so we don't have to manually. FS is the file system, path is the path, and then URLs for parsing URLs. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So how do we create an HTTP server in Node? Basically what we do is we'll just simply say var server equals http.createServer. And in create server, it's going to accept a function. So the function is going to take a rec or request and a result. However, I generally like to name these rec and res. So for here, let's just make this really simple. I'm just going to say res and hello, and that's it. And so we'll talk about this in a second here. So now that we have the server kind of created, so we've created our own HTTP server, we have to tell it what port to listen on. So I'm going to say server.listen, and I'll just do 4000 here. And I'll console write out something here. I'll say console log server is on 4000. Now you generally allow this port to be configured, but we're not worried about that right now. So now to run the server, all I have to do is say node server. And now it says servers on 4000. And so here's the code. If I hop over here on my browser, I can, oops, that's localhost at 400. I can go ahead and access this at localhost port 4000, and I get hello. So let's talk about the HTTP server just a little bit here. So the HTTP server, what it does is it accepts a callback, and the callback is going to receive a request object and a result object. Now, what's really cool about these is these are streams. We'll see an example of how to take advantage of that pretty soon here, but a stream in Node is, well, like a stream in any other language that you might be familiar with. It's the concept of a constant stream of data that can be written to. And so what we do right here is we say res.end, and then we pass in some data. Now, we could have done this instead. We could have done res.write hello, and gotten the same result. Quick thing, if you do change your code at all, be sure you hop back over into your command prompt window and or terminal and hit Control-C to stop the server and then run it again, because it's not going to pick up on your changes. So now if we come back here, we'll say the same thing, hello. So basically, the res object is a stream that accepts data, and we can write to it. And when we're done writing to it, we have to tell it we're done. And this is really important. We have to tell it we're done, because what if we had another asynchronous operation going on and we only wanted to write the result out when we were done with the other asynchronous operation? But anyway, so that's really the basics here. Again, another quick thing to note is our Node application will continue to run indefinitely until we hit Control-C, and that's because the HTTP create server creates that server and it blocks the process from exiting. However, server.listen does not actually have does not block itself, but the process won't end until the server is destroyed. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and I want to make a list of all of the files in that awesome directory we had. If you recall from the last example, this documents directory. If you don't have a documents directory, go ahead and create it here in the same parent directory, and go ahead and add a couple of basic documents. So I want to read in a list of that and print it out to the user. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of I'm going to kind of break my code out a little bit. I'm going to say write index rec res, and then down here I'm going to say function write index rec res, or request result. And so for this method, all I'm going to do is I'm going to read out or print out all of the files in the directory. But we need to do a couple of things first. I do want to go ahead and set an HTTP header on the result. So I'm going to say res write head 200 with a content type of text HTML. So it's important to tell the browser that we're going to be passing it HTML so it knows to render HTML. If you'll notice, right now it's the browser is rendering this as just text. You can tell because it's just monospace here, and that's going to be the default in HTTP. But we want to go ahead and set the content type to text HTML. We also want to set the status code to 200, indicating that there wasn't an error. Obviously, we could have some more robust error handling here, but I'm not too worried about that. Now, the next thing we have to do is we have to go ahead and read in the files. So I'm going to say, before I do that, I will come up here and I will create a constant, or just a variable, we'll talk about constants later, called directory, and it will be /documents. So that's just up here because we're going to need this multiple places. So then I'm going to say fs.readdir, and I'm going to pass in directory followed by a callback of error files. So if there is an error, I'm just going to say if error res end error return. We could do better error handling than that, but I think that's pretty straightforward for our purposes here. So it's important that this is an asynchronous function, and res has not been ended yet until the asynchronous function gets invoked. So that request will remain open. The browser won't receive any data yet, and the connection to the server won't be closed. So now let's go ahead and write out some HTML. This is going to be really easy using ES6's template feature. Actually, this was the main reason why I wanted to do this example, so I could show this off and how cool it is, so that you guys can be comfortable with me using that syntax in other places. So what I'm going to do here is we're in a closure right now, but we have access to the parent scope, obviously. We have access to the rec and res parameters within this closure. So what I can do here is I can say res.write, and now instead of doing a string, I'm going to do 2 backticks. Now the 2 backticks indicate that I want to open up a template string. Template string. Now the template string has 2 properties that make it really awesome to work with. The first property is that it's multi-line. So we finally have multi-line strings in JavaScript. That makes me very happy. So stuff. So this is completely valid. I can go ahead and restart the server, hop back over to Firefox Chrome, and I see stuff rendered out. Also notice that Chrome is still spinning. The reason being I never invoked the end method on the result. In fact, since this is going to be the only thing we're going to write out, I'm going to change this from res.write to res.end. So again, end accepts a string, but the difference is it'll write it, but the difference is it'll end the stream. So it'll make it so the request actually finishes. Let's go ahead and nuke our server and restart it. Coming back into Chrome, we now see that the request did end. So anyway, that's not that interesting. Let's go ahead and write some HTML. I'm not going to worry about doc types, heads, or bodies. That doesn't really, that's not important right now. So I'm just going to open up with a UL that's going to contain all of our files. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to reference a variable. Now this variable is something we haven't created yet, but we will here in a moment. It's going to be file list HTML. So we're going to construct the file list HTML, and then we're going to render it out. So, like I said, the first really cool thing about template strings is that they're multi-line. The second really cool thing about template strings is we can render out JavaScript expressions. So this is a JavaScript expression. It starts with a $, and then is encapsulated by curlies. And then inside this expression, I'm referencing a variable. Of course, the variable doesn't exist yet. I could certainly start off, certainly say var file list HTML equals hey there, just so my editor stops complaining. But of course, we'll actually populate this with more HTML in a moment here. The next thing I'm going to do is do a form. So I'm going to say form method equals post, exit form, and then I'm going to do an input type equals text, name equals file, and then a text area, name equals text, and then of course a submit button. So we have a basic form for basically creating a file. So that's going to be really cool, and it's going to allow us to talk about how to parse post data. So right here, our file list HTML, let's go ahead and assemble it. So I'm going to start off by saying file list HTML equals blank empty string. Well, let's first make sure that this works before I do that. Come up here, hit Control C, hit up arrow, hit enter, and that restarts our server. Coming back here, we now see that everything is being rendered in the way we want to. We can always right-click and view page source to see exactly what was rendered here. Now, of course, the template string did pick up on all of this indentation, which is why it's indented so far, but I'm really not concerned about that with HTML being a white space and sensitive language. So now what we're going to do is we're going to populate file list HTML. So we're going to populate it with links. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say for var I equals 0, I smaller than files length I++, and then I'm going to say var file equals files at I, and then I'm going to say file list HTML plus equals, then I'm going to open up another template string. And this template string is going to have an li. Inside of the li, there's going to be an ahref. Now, inside of the anchor tag, I'm going to put in a reference to the file variable. So we'll print out the name of the file as the text content of the anchor tag. And for the URL, I'm simply going to say question mark to open up the query string, and file equals another template, file. So when you have a anchor and its href is just a question mark equals, then when you click on it, it'll replace whatever query string you have with that query string. So coming back here, let's hit Control C, hit up, then hit Node Server. So our server is now running again. Come back here and refresh and check that out. So now if we look at the source, we see that we have multiple LIs, multiple list items with anchor tags inside of them with the proper URL set. And I can click on them, but you notice it doesn't really make a difference here. It doesn't make a difference because we're not handling anything but this. So basically any path you type in here is still going to return or be the exact same index page. Of course, we'll be fixing that shortly here. But yeah, so this template strings are awesome, and I highly recommend you guys use them. Now, I want to point out that some people who might be more familiar with the functional approach to JavaScript might be thinking that I could have condensed this for loop into a single line. In fact, I could have even condensed it right here into this UL by using a map method, either built into JavaScript or from a library like Lodash. Yes, I absolutely could, but I'm trying to keep the JavaScript as simple as possible for now until we have an opportunity to talk about more of the ES6 features. But I think that'll wrap up this video. In the next video, we're actually going to display the contents of these and get an opportunity to talk more about streams, which are very important. Even if you don't care about using Node for writing applications, they're very important because Gulp is based around streams. And we'll also see how we can read and post data and actually create new files. And I think that's pretty cool. So we'll see you guys in the next video.